lot of people have romanticized views of the Middle Ages. They see dragons, chivalry, lovely damsels in pointed hats, armored knights on ponderous steeds, and courtly love. But nothing could be further from the reality than this. The Middle Ages were viewed by most as filthy, challenging, and dangerous. Or at least, not dangerous enough. Assume for the moment that you entered medieval England by accident, that you had a time slip, and that you found yourself marooned in the midst of the 14th century. You would immediately come to the realization that you couldn't comprehend a word that anyone was saying. The clergy spoke Church Latin, the aristocracy spoke French, and the common people spoke Middle English. If you can understand the odd word, you might be able to communicate with someone intelligibly at this point. You just speak modern English. Therefore, if you were unlucky enough to be a lady and you had learned a little bit of the language, you would be well versed in adversity. Medieval women were typically considered morally weak due to the emphasis placed on the Bible, which led to their oppression and subordination. St. Paul's writings in particular emphasize men's dominance over women and their obligation to keep quiet in church and submit to their spouses. Work was gendered for the peasant woman, who was in charge of all domestic duties, like as spinning, brewing, cooking, weaving, tending to cattle and kids, and splitting farm and field labor with the men. The majority of women were supposed to wait for marriage, or to become nuns as their first career choice. Pregnancy followed marriage, and childbirth followed that. In the absence of current pain management techniques, in a sterile medical environment, seemingly minor problems could have catastrophic consequences for a woman and child in medieval times. A safe delivery was not guaranteed by wealth or social standing, and a cesarean section was only done when the mother was terminally ill or had passed away. For instance, 1 in 5 laboring women in Florence perished in the 1420s. The likelihood of dying during childbirth was so high that women were advised to draft a last will and testament well in advance of giving birth, which rather detracts from what ought to be a happy occasion. Early birth, early demise. In the modern era, it is uncommon or unanticipated for a kid to die. But in the Middle Ages, you would be lucky to live until the age of 5. In medieval England, 1/3 of children perished before that age due to the high child mortality rate. Furthermore, the risks would begin when you were still a fetus without you being aware of the possibility of alcohol-fetal syndrome. Throughout their pregnancies, medieval ladies would have been happily downing large amounts of ale, wine, or both. Let's not even talk about their diet. One of the worst catastrophes anyone can contemplate is the death of a kid. Depending on the year, the mortality rate in medieval Europe was estimated to be between 20 and 30% for those who passed away before turning 7. That includes infant deaths resulting from mishaps during delivery, accidents and diseases, famines, and war. Parents thousands of miles distant experienced the same anguish. Deadly illnesses included whooping cough, measles, influenza, and stomach infections. Diseases that are easily treatable today. In Japan during the Middle Ages, 48% of people died as children. Approximately 1 out of every 2 children dies at 48%. By whom do you refer to as a peasant? The issue with living in the Middle Ages was that serfs made up 85% of the population, meaning you were more likely to be one of them than not. Because you were obligated to the Lord and his land, you would not only need to cultivate food to feed your family and yourself, but also to ensure that the Lord would receive his just compensation. You might as well have been a slave, as you were unable to leave the country without your Lord's consent or even get married. You would have been constantly dependent on the weather. An abundance or lack of rain might have disastrous effects on crops, leading to malnourishment and, in the worst situations, starvation. A weakened immune system from malnutrition contributed to an increase in typhus, smallpox, and diarrhea. When food was available, it was mostly in the form of pottage. a thin stew cooked with barley, oats, rye, or millet, and coarse bread. The wild animals of medieval Europe, such as rabbits, hares, deer, and boars, were abundant, but they were reserved for the aristocracy to hunt, and poaching was frequently punishable by severe consequences. The wool used to make the clothing wasn't the most comfortable. Not that the houses were particularly grand either. The majority had only 1 or 2 rooms, maybe 1 or 2 little windows, and no chimney, because they were frequently shared with animals, especially in the winter when the weather was harsh. They were dark, smoky, stinky, and unhygienic. Is it any surprise that life in the Middle Ages was so short when there was no running water and central heating or lighting? In the 140 years between 1330 and 1479, the average life expectancy for men was a meager 24 years. Though still not fantastic, women's average age came out at 33. Medieval crime, the legal system, and the penalties meted out were all very different from what they are today. There was no running out to McDonald's in your long, pointy shoes on a Sunday morning for your McMuffin breakfast, since the church ruled over almost every element of life, including what you could and could not wear and eat. There were no police. If you were a victim of a crime, all you could do was raise a hue and cry by screaming loudly and hope for the best. Death was the penalty for grave offenses, which included not only treason and murder, but also forgery, arson, receiving stolen property, theft, and burglary. In actuality, taking anything more than 12 pence, or roughly 3 weeks' pay, would land you in the gibbet. Trial by ordeal was a practice that existed early in the era. In this case, the accused's guilt or innocence was ascertained by putting the suspect through a grueling and frequently fatal experience, including walking over hot coals or dipping your hand into boiling water or oil. God would work a miracle to save you if you were innocent. Even minor infractions, such as debt, gambling, playing football, or using foul language in public, came with severe penalties, ranging from branding or jail to public humiliation and the stocks or pillory. The poor nutrition and unhygienic environment in prisons claimed many lives. There was a great deal of theft, which was the main cause of crime. Concerning the negative aspects of war, the number of battles fought during the Middle Ages, which lasted for a millennium, seems absurd. Over 370 battles broke out between various empires in all, with the Italian War being the last to end in 1504. Some battles, like the Crusades, were fought for what were perceived as honorable causes, while others were fought to choose whose incompetent would take the throne as king or queen in the future. However, at that time, as it is now, the regular people were left to bear the ultimate cost. Due to the European feudal system, serfs were required to fight if they were living in the kingdom of one of 2 wealthy individuals who want to duel. Peasants were required to regularly provide their master with military service. Men were only taken away for brief periods of time, so you might return home if you were fortunate enough to survive the first 40 days. This was due to the fact that if everyone left for war at the same time, no one would be left to look after the aristocrats. Without labor, there would be no crops and no money for the wealthy to waste on pointless battles. As a result, there were many dead in the medieval military, which was largely disorganized. The nobility also did not escape death. Roughly 30% of them lost their lives in the skirmish. Regarding the commoners, the exact number of victims is unknown, because no one was believed to be important enough to keep track of them. Only an approximation of the number of warriors and innocent bystanders lost in medieval conflicts can be made. 90,000 individuals lost their lives at the Siege of Jerusalem during the First Crusade. Between 1 and 3 million people died during the Crusade era, which lasted from 1095 to the end of the 13th century. The 100 Years' War claimed the lives of 2 to 3.5 million people and was fought from 1337 and 1453. Additionally, between 30 and 40 million people died as a result of the Mongol invasions and conquests of Asia in the 13th and 14th centuries. It was a really bad moment to be a peasant or a soldier. Poisons. Assume for the moment that you were wealthy in the Middle Ages and could afford all the better things in life. Would it have increased your chances of surviving? With their pottage and bread, the peasants would have been far worse off than you. For you, the table would be piled high with delectable meats like peacock or deer and rich cream sauces, accompanied by exquisite wine and sugary pastries. You would sip from delicately adorned cups and eat from exquisitely lacquered plates of gourmet cuisine. The lead oxide used to make the glazing was the source of the issue. Indeed, it was aesthetically pleasing and functional in terms of cleaning, which made it quite well liked by those who could buy it. However, the lead was absorbed into the food when acidic or salty food was stored in glazed pots or served on glazed plates, dissolving the coating. Over time, lead accumulates as toxic heavy metal in the human body. Acute poisoning can induce infertility, headaches, and stomach pain by attacking the nerve system. Prolonged poisoning can cause unconsciousness, seizures, and even death. Children are still developing. Therefore, the impacts might be severe and hinder their capacity to learn. People had lead levels far beyond average, according to medieval bones found in cemeteries in more prosperous metropolitan areas of Germany and Denmark. Coins, roof tiles, and windows with stained glass also contained lead. Another possible source of the poisoning was the rainwater that was frequently gathered from rooftops for human consumption. The primary source of sustenance for the medievals was bread, which was frequently made from rye that had been infected with the fungus Claviceps purpurea. This led to the human infection known as St. Anthony's fire. Throughout the Middle Ages, there were numerous outbreaks that claimed millions of lives and left tens of thousands of others sick. While hallucinations, cramping in the muscles, nausea, sleeplessness, and sores were the symptoms of what is now known as ergot poisoning. In severe situations, if treatment is not received, the affected person's hands and feet may experience reduced blood flow, which can result in excruciating agony. Fingers, toes, hands, and feet may become black and eventually fall off if gangrene develops. According to some historians, ergot poisoning may have been the cause of some of the epidemics related to dance that took place between the 14th and the 17th centuries. Thousands of people, at times, would dance wildly in the streets during these outbreaks, until they passed out from weariness or other injuries.